The Titanic has offered an unprecedented insight into the ship's final moments. A detailed three-dimensional reconstruction.
At 12,500 feet beneath the restless Atlantic, daylight is nothing more than a memory. Here the water is black, silent, and crushing, an environment so alien that even seasoned explorers still feel a shiver when their equipment slips below the last glimmer of the surface. On a calm, pre-dawn morning, a specially built research vessel lowered an advanced submersible drone through the swells. It disappeared into the gloom with a faint mechanical hum, bound for the most famous shipwreck in human history, RMS Titanic. The operators on deck watched their monitors as the cable unwound, the drone descending through layers of cold water. Sensors measured the mounting pressure, each meter of depth adding weight until the hull endured forces nearly 380 times what we feel at sea level. Inside the control room, the pilot's hands hovered over joysticks, every movement deliberate. This was not just another deep-sea expedition. It was a journey into a frozen tomb. As the drone approached the ocean floor, the camera feeds turned to pure darkness. No sunlight penetrates this far. Only the drone's high-powered LED lamps could pierce the void. When the pilot flicked them on, two white beams cut across the silt like headlights on an unlit road. Slowly, shapes began to materialize, a fractured railing here, a twisted steel plate there, ghostly hints that the Titanic's remains lay just beyond reach. Then the bow appeared, looming out of the blackness like a shadow of a mountain. Even after a century of decay, the ship's sheer size still astonishes. Rust-colored stalactites of iron bacteria dripped downward, shimmering in the artificial light. The drone paused, engines humming softly, as if to pay respect before slipping past the giant hull breach that has fascinated historians for generations. Crossing that jagged threshold was like stepping through a portal in time. Inside, the silence became palpable. Sediment hung in the water like fine smoke, drifting lazily when the thrusters nudged forward. Each turn of the camera revealed details no diver's eyes had ever seen: ornate metal fixtures half buried in silt, remnants of wallpaper clinging stubbornly to warped wooden beams, and here and there, objects so ordinary they ached with human presence. A porcelain teacup lay on its side, its floral pattern startlingly vivid. A pair of leather shoes rested together as if someone had just slipped them off. The drone glided deeper through a collapsed corridor, its lights sweeping across wreckage that had not felt a touch. Since the early hours of April 15, 1912, the absence of oxygen and the near freezing, temperatures had slowed decay in surprising ways. Fabric fragments still draped over skeletal furniture. Pieces of clothing retained their shape. In one chamber, a child's porcelain doll sat upright in the silt, its painted eyes unblinking, a silent witness to catastrophe. When the pilot guided the drone into what remained of the grand staircase, a collective breath caught in the control room. Once the centerpiece of Titanic's luxury, the staircase had carried first-class passengers to glittering dining salons and smoking rooms. Now, more than a century later, its wooden steps were long gone, but the graceful curve of the iron framework endured. The drone's lights traced the elegant spiral, illuminating decorative scrollwork still clinging to rusted rails. Even stripped of splendor, the scale inspired awe, a skeletal cathedral of maritime ambition. Navigating the narrow hallways beyond was a delicate dance. Every thrust risked stirring clouds of fine sediment that could blind the cameras or settle onto fragile artifacts. The pilot advanced inch by inch, careful not to touch the brittle walls. In one tight compartment, the drone's sensors flagged an unexpected shape beneath a collapsed beam, a form roughly the size and outline of a human body. The camera lingered, its light catching what could have been fabric folds or perhaps just a trick of debris. The control room fell silent. No one spoke for several minutes. Speculation rippled quietly among the crew. Could it truly be a preserved body after so many decades, or merely a cruel illusion sculpted by time and silt? The drone did not disturb the sight. Instead, it recorded slow, steady footage from multiple angles before retreating, the pilot whispering almost unconsciously as if in a cathedral. That single image underscored the gravity of their mission. Titanic is not merely a historical artifact, It is the resting place of more than 1,500 souls. Each corridor, each collapsed cabin is both an archaeological wonder and a grave. The research team had debated for months how to balance the world's curiosity with reverence for the dead. How much should they reveal? Which frames should remain private? They knew that every decision carried moral weight. As the drone continued its meticulous circuit, the silence of the wreck seemed almost to press against the camera lens. No sound but the gentle hum of motors and the faint hiss of distant currents reached the microphones. It was as though the ship itself held its breath, guarding secrets from an age of steam and steel. By the time the drone emerged back into open water, its memory banks were heavy with images, hallways frozen mid-collapse, furnishings coated in ghostly silt, personal belongings scattered like whispers of lives interrupted. On deck, the team exhaled a collective sigh of awe and solemnity. They had not merely documented a wreck, they had entered a time capsule, a silent world that speaks of ambition, tragedy, and the relentless power of the sea. The footage that evening left hardened explorers speechless. Even on high-definition monitors, the scene seemed almost unreal, like peering through a window into the past. Historians would soon analyze every frame for structural clues, but for the crew that night, the deeper impact was emotional. They had glimpsed the Titanic not as a distant legend, but as a living memory, a monument to human dreams and human loss resting in eternal night. If the Titanic represents humanity's greatest maritime tragedy, the vehicle that slipped inside her shattered hull is a triumph of human ingenuity. Without it, the haunting images from the wreck's interior would remain forever unseen. To understand how such a fragile-looking machine could survive, and even thrive in one of Earth's most hostile environments, we need to follow the drone's journey from the drawing board to the ocean floor. The North Atlantic is merciless at the best of times. At a depth of roughly 3,800 meters, about 12,500 feet, the pressure reaches more than 5,500 pounds per square inch. Imagine stacking an entire skyscraper's weight onto a single car tire. That's the relentless force bearing down on every square inch of the drone's frame. Any ordinary submersible would be crushed like a soda can, long before it reached the Titanic's resting place. The engineers behind this mission knew they had to build something extraordinary. The drone's skeleton is forged from titanium, a metal prized for its unmatched strength-to-weight ratio and its resistance to corrosion. Every seam and weld underwent exhaustive testing, from cryogenic freeze chambers to pressure tanks that mimic the deep sea. A single flaw, one tiny crack, could spell instant catastrophe when the vehicle met the crushing darkness of the abyss. Its camera housing is another feat of design. Ordinary glass would implode under the stress, so the team used a thick dome of specially reinforced acrylic. The curvature helps disperse the immense external pressure while keeping the optical path crystal clear. Inside this protective bubble sit ultra-high-definition cameras capable of capturing even the faintest textures. The weave of century-old fabric, the etchings on a brass handle, the ghostly shimmer of iron bacteria trailing like lace. But a camera is worthless without light. Sunlight surrenders to the sea long before the 1,000-meter mark. At Titanic depths, darkness is total and absolute. To pierce it, the drone carries a bank of high-powered LED lamps that flood the surroundings with a crisp, white glow. Yet illumination underwater is trickier than simply flipping a switch. Light scatters and diffuses, especially when the water holds suspended silt or plankton. Too strong a beam creates a blizzard of backscatter, turning images into cloudy smudges. Too weak, and the wreck melts back into shadow. The operators perfected a dance of brightness and angle, adjusting intensity second by second to capture each chamber in sharp relief without stirring the delicate sediment. Navigation inside the Titanic posed perhaps the greatest challenge of all. Unlike the open ocean, the wreck is a labyrinth of twisted steel, collapsed ceilings, and corridors scarcely wider than a person's shoulders. A traditional remotely operated vehicle, those big lumbering workhorses used for oil rig maintenance, would have been hopelessly clumsy. This drone was different, compact, nimble, almost insect-like in its agility. 4 microthrusters arranged at precise angles allow it to move forward, reverse, strafe sideways, or pivot in place. It can hover motionless, holding position to the centimeter even as deep currents try to nudge it off course. Control comes from the surface ship through a slender but incredibly strong tether that unwinds thousands of feet down into the darkness. The cable serves 2 essential roles. It powers the drone continuously, freeing it from battery limits, and it transmits a torrent of real-time data, video feeds, sonar readings, sensor reports back to the pilots. From their dimly lit control room, the operators guide the craft with joysticks and touch screens, steering it as if playing a high-stakes video game. Every twitch of the thumb echoes instantly in the drone's movements a mile below, but the tether is both lifeline and liability. In the Titanic's narrow passageways, a single snag could trap the vehicle or, worse, damage the fragile wreck itself. To counter that risk, the engineers integrated a dynamic slack management system that continually adjusts tension, ensuring the line never coils or drags. The pilots monitor its position as closely as they watch the cameras, threading the cord through the maze like expert climbers belaying a rope. The sensory arsenal on board is equally impressive. Besides its primary cameras, the drone carries stereo imaging systems and laser scanners that sweep the surroundings to generate precise 3-dimensional models. Every beam of light the drone emits is captured, timed, and translated into a point on a virtual map. Back on the surface, powerful computers stitch these points together, producing digital replicas so accurate that researchers can walk the wreck on their screens, measuring collapsed staircases, inspecting rivet lines, or tracking minute shifts in the ship's structure year by year. Deep-sea currents can swirl unpredictably through Titanic's broken hull, threatening to shove the drone into jagged metal or collapse an unstable beam. To guard against accidents, the craft relies on an AI-assisted guidance system. Arrays of sonar and proximity sensors feed data to onboard processors that predict obstacles milliseconds ahead. If the drone drifts too close to a wall or beam, the AI gently corrects its course, a silent co-pilot with reflexes far faster than any human. The operators remain in control, but the machine's autonomous instincts provide a critical safety net. Some might wonder why not simply send divers or a manned submersible. The answer lies in cold, unforgiving physics. Human divers cannot survive these depths. The pressure would crush a standard dive suit instantly. Manned subs, while capable of reaching the site, are large, expensive, and risky, and their bulk prevents them from squeezing through Titanic's interior corridors. The drone, in contrast, combines small size, relative affordability, and surgical precision, making it the perfect emissary for a mission where fragility and reverence are paramount. Even communication with the surface had to be reinvented. Radio waves don't travel through seawater, so the team relies on fiber optic signals coursing through the tether, carrying gigabytes of high-definition footage with almost no delay. That near-instant feedback allows the pilots to make split-second adjustments as they weave through a corridor or pause to examine a century-old suitcase. Before deployment, every system endured brutal testing. Pressure chambers that simulated crushing depths, refrigerated tanks chilled to near freezing to mimic the North Atlantic, and vibration rigs that shook the frame as if buffeted by undersea currents. Only after months of trials did the engineers declare the vehicle ready to meet the Titanic. The result is more than a machine. It is a testament to decades of progress in robotics, materials, science, and human curiosity. Where the ship itself symbolizes the limits of early 20th century engineering, the drone embodies the achievements of the 21st. One represents ambition brought low by nature. The other shows how technology can adapt, endure, and ultimately illuminate. As the drone drifted through the Titanic's silent chambers, every whir of its thrusters and flicker of its lights told a story not just of exploration, but of painstaking preparation. Each beam of illumination, each delicate turn, was the culmination of thousands of design decisions and countless hours of testing. Without this marvel of modern engineering, the haunting images of the grand staircase and the mysterious human-shaped form would remain locked forever in darkness, and yet the team knows the drone is merely a beginning. The data it collects, 3D maps, structural readings, ultra-high-definition video will guide future missions and help conservationists monitor the wreck's slow decay. Its success opens doors to other lost worlds, undiscovered shipwrecks, deep-sea ecosystems, underwater caves that no human will ever set foot inside. For now, though, its greatest triumph is simple. It allowed us to witness the Titanic as she rests today, not through faded blueprints or artists' renderings, but in unflinching crystalline reality. In the stark beams of its lights, the boundary between past and present dissolved. And history, long asleep beneath miles of ocean, breathed again. The Titanic has inspired more books, films, and expeditions than perhaps any other shipwreck in history. But until recently, almost all of that fascination focused on her grand exterior, the broken bow and stern, the vast debris field stretching across the North Atlantic seabed. What the drone revealed, however, changes everything. For the first time, researchers could look beyond the ship's famous silhouette and into its hidden heart, capturing a three-dimensional portrait of a vessel frozen mid-catastrophe. From the very first pass of the drone's laser scanners, it became clear that the interior of the wreck was far more complex than anyone had dared to imagine. Over the decades, currents and gravity have twisted the Titanic into an immense, fragile puzzle. Decks have collapsed onto one another, ceilings dangle at impossible angles, and long-sealed rooms gape open like wounds. Earlier missions could only guess at the layout by comparing century-old blueprints with grainy sonar shadows. Now, high-resolution video and 3D mapping have replaced speculation with precision. The drone slipped through narrow openings where no manned submersible could fit, tracing a path through corridors that had been sealed since 1912. As it advanced, an array of lasers pulsed against the walls and furniture, measuring every contour down to a fraction of an inch. Back on the surface ship, banks of computers turned those millions of data points into a living model of the wreck. Scientists watching in real time could rotate the digital ship, peel away decks, and virtually walk through cabins untouched for more than a century. It was as if the Titanic herself were surrendering her secrets, room by room. These scans quickly began rewriting history. Some compartments that historians long believed intact were discovered to have collapsed decades earlier, hidden beneath layers of silt and debris. Other areas, thought to be hopelessly destroyed, appeared astonishingly preserved. A first-class lounge still showed the ghost of its once ornate paneling. A section of the Marconi wireless room, the hub where frantic distress calls once crackled into the night, remained unexpectedly stable, its metal framework stubborn against time and tide. The 3D models also help explain the mechanics of the disaster. By comparing the wreck's current geometry with the ship's original plans, structural engineers can trace where the hull first buckled, how the decks pancaked as water rushed in, and why certain bulkheads failed sooner than expected. Minute details, bent beams, fractured rivets. The way deck plates folded tell a forensic story of those frantic final hours, turning legend into measurable fact. Yet what moved the team most were the personal traces scattered throughout the labyrinth. The cameras recorded a corridor where a neat cluster of leather suitcases lay half-buried, as though passengers had carefully set them down and never returned. In another compartment, delicate crystal glassware still sparkled faintly when the drone's light swept past, each piece balanced exactly where it had fallen. A shattered wine bottle, cork still wedged tight, rested beside a broken serving tray in what had once been a bustling dining saloon. These were not merely artifacts. They were echoes of lives interrupted. Perhaps the most haunting discoveries were the fabrics. Against all expectation, low temperatures and an oxygen-poor environment had slowed bacterial decay to a crawl. Curtains remained draped across rusting rods. Upholstery clung to skeletal chairs. Even fragments of clothing, some with recognizable patterns, lay gently folded beneath a thin skin of silt. Seeing cloth survive where steel had surrendered felt almost supernatural, a reminder that nature preserves and erases according to its own inscrutable logic. The mapping project does more than satisfy historical curiosity. It provides a critical baseline for conservation. The Titanic is not a static monument. It is a living ecosystem and a deteriorating structure all at once. Rusticles, strange colonies of iron-eating bacteria, dangle from the hull like crimson icicles and steadily consume the metal. In places where earlier explorers photographed intact walls, the drone now found yawning gaps or collapsed beams. By comparing today's 3D data with earlier surveys, scientists can calculate exactly how fast the wreck is disintegrating and which sections are most vulnerable. This knowledge shapes every decision about preservation. Some argue that nothing should be touched, that the wreck must be allowed to return to the sea. Others advocate for carefully stabilizing certain areas to prolong their existence for future generations. Whatever the strategy, accurate mapping is essential. It's a race against time. Each passing year, currents shift, bacteria feast, and the Atlantic inexorably claims more of the ship. The drone's quiet work also reframed how historians interpret the human story of the sinking. Patterns of debris, suitcases gathered in one hallway, a tangle of dining chairs swept into a corner, suggest the chaotic currents that tore through the vessel as it broke apart. The placement of personal items hints at the frantic choices passengers made in their final moments. Luggage dragged toward lifeboats, valuables abandoned mid-flight, everyday objects turned into markers of tragedy. For descendants of those who perished, these findings carry a profound emotional weight. Seeing a great-grandparent's likely cabin or an heirloom preserved in situ bridges a gap of more than a century. The digital reconstructions allow families to experience the Titanic not as a distant myth, but as a real place where their ancestors once dined, slept, and dreamed. It is history transformed from abstraction into intimate reality. Researchers believe the data gathered here will influence deep-sea archaeology for decades. The methods developed to chart Titanic's interiors, miniaturized thrusters, laser-based 3D scanning, AI-assisted navigation, can be applied to countless other wrecks and natural formations. From ancient trade ships in the Mediterranean to unexplored caves beneath polar ice, the technology that mapped this graveyard will open doors to worlds humans have never seen. Yet amid the excitement of discovery, the team never forgot where they were. Each new corridor revealed not just steel and wood, but the memory of more than 1,500 souls. The precision of the maps is both a scientific achievement and a memorial. Every beam traced, every artifact documented, is a silent tribute to those who never returned to the surface. By the time the drone completed its surveys, the researchers had captured an unprecedented treasure trove. Thousands of hours of ultra-high-definition video, billions of laser data points, and a digital reconstruction so detailed it could guide future explorers for generations. But more than data, they brought back a story. A living chronicle of a ship that continues to evolve beneath the waves. When the team finally powered down the drone and reviewed the composite 3D model, the mood aboard the research vessel was both triumphant and solemn. On their screens, the Titanic floated again, not in the icy waters of 1912, but in shimmering pixels of laser light. They could zoom into a stateroom window, glide through the shattered grand staircase, or trace the gentle curve of the once majestic bow. It was a resurrection of sorts, a way to honor the past without disturbing it, to witness the grandeur and the ruin in one sweeping, digital breath. The mapping of the Titanic's graveyard is more than an archaeological milestone. It is a conversation across time. The ship, once a marvel of human ambition and then a symbol of human tragedy, now speaks again, quietly, through data and images, through ghostly rooms recreated in virtual space. Thanks to the drone's patient exploration, the world can finally walk the Titanic's halls, not as intruders but as respectful guests, bearing witness to a story the ocean tried, but never fully managed to keep. For all the cutting-edge robotics, 3D scans, and streams of data, the expedition to film the Titanic from within has always been, at its heart, a profoundly human endeavor. Behind every hum of a thruster and every flicker of a monitor on the research vessel stood a team of people bound together by curiosity, reverence, and the knowledge that they were peering into a grave. The crew of scientists, pilots, historians, and marine engineers lived for weeks in a floating laboratory far out in the North Atlantic. The ship itself became a microcosm of the mission. Long days of meticulous preparation, sleepless nights filled with anticipation, and the constant thrum of engines as the vessel held position above the Titanic's coordinates. Weather could change without warning. Dense fog or sudden gales might halt operations for hours or even days. Every team member learned to work within the rhythm of the sea, surrendering to its moods while never losing focus on the fragile objective below. Among them were veterans of earlier dives and first-timers who had grown up fascinated by the Titanic's legend. Many carried personal connections, relatives who had crossed the Atlantic in the same era, childhood memories of watching documentaries, or an abiding passion for maritime history. Each brought a different perspective, but all shared an unspoken understanding. This was more than a scientific assignment. They were guardians of a memorial. Operating the underwater drone required the calm concentration of a concert pianist. Inside the control room, dimly lit to reduce glare, pilots gripped joysticks as live video streamed in from nearly 4 kilometers below. A faint delay meant every movement demanded finesse and patience. One wrong nudge could brush centuries-old fabric or disturb delicate silt, clouding the view and risking the integrity of the site. Silence often ruled the room as the operators guided the drone through narrow passages, their eyes fixed on the monitors while colleagues quietly called out depth, heading, and tether status. Moments of awe broke that hush. When the grand staircase first came into view, its sweeping curve now a fractured echo of Edwardian luxury, a collective breath filled the room. The carved balustrades were mostly gone, but the geometry remained unmistakable. Some crew members found themselves unexpectedly moved, tears welling as they witnessed the physical space where so many once descended in evening finery or rushed upward in panic during the sinking. The Titanic was no longer an abstract story. It was there, tangible and immediate, a silent witness to lives lost and dreams unfulfilled. The emotional impact did not end when the cameras were turned off. Evenings on deck often became quiet gatherings under the cold Atlantic stars. Crew members shared reflections, personal histories, and the weight of what they had seen. Some spoke of family members who had emigrated across the ocean in the early 1900s, imagining how easily fate might have placed them aboard that doomed liner. Others simply listened to the endless rhythm of the waves, humbled by the ocean's power to both conceal and preserve. Respect for the site guided every decision. The team adhered strictly to international guidelines that recognized the Titanic as a maritime memorial. No artifacts were removed, no intrusive tools deployed. The goal was to document and observe, leaving the wreck exactly as it was found. Before each dive, a short ceremony of sorts unfolded, a reminder from the mission leader that more than 1,500 souls still rest there, and that their memory must shape every action. Back on shore, historians and family descendants awaited each update. For some relatives of the lost, seeing new footage brought bittersweet comfort. They could finally picture the spaces where their ancestors spent their final hours, cabins, corridors, perhaps even personal belongings captured in crisp detail. Letters of gratitude later poured in, acknowledging the care and sensitivity the team had shown. The expedition became a bridge between generations, a way to honor those who perished by telling their stories with accuracy and compassion. The mission also highlighted the fragility of cultural memory. In an age of constant information and fleeting headlines, the Titanic endures as a touchstone, a reminder of human ambition, technological optimism, and the thin margin between mastery and disaster. Each dive reaffirmed why these stories matter. The ship is not just a relic of a bygone era. It is a lesson etched in steel and salt water about humility before nature's forces. Daily life aboard the research vessel reflected a balance of intense work and quiet reverence. Marine biologists cataloged deep-sea organisms that had colonized the wreck, turning rusting beams into habitats. Engineers monitored pressure gauges and thruster readouts, ready to troubleshoot at the slightest anomaly. Historians cross-checked camera footage with century-old passenger manifests, hoping to match artifacts to specific individuals. Meals were quick but communal, often punctuated by hushed excitement over a newly captured image or a particularly revealing scan. Technology may have enabled the exploration, but it was the people, each with their own hopes, fears, and dedication, who carried the mission forward. Long after the